Greetings, everyone. Nate the Nerdarchy here from Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm hanging out with a nerd.
I am Kienata, and tonight we are going to be discussing the long con and the short con. the long story and the short story. Nate and I both ascribe to different schools of thought in D&D adventures.
This is true.
Yeah, Nate likes the hey. Nobody asked
I like
what
puppies.
you think. Yeah, Nate likes the longer, overarching, change the world story, and I prefer the short Batman episode kind of story. So.
Yes, and as far as well, I guess we're going to get into the nitty gritty of each one of them. But they both have very similar elements to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, what makes there's certain things. It's kind of formulaic. What kind of makes a good story or like a set of series of stories.
Yes.
So we can get into that a bit later. But just I think overall, I think we should state our case. And I have to say that I like kind of like that grand design, the large, long story arc or overarching story arc, and I like them because
arching. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Anyway, like
yes.
I was saying, with the grand story, grand story, you have a lot of time to build up. You've got time to invest the player characters, in the different nooks and crannies of your story and the different little nuances that you've got set up. And you can also kind of gather multiple threads and tie them all together and to create one kind of like strong chord of a story.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that element of making a giant story arc.
For me, I feel like most players have come from a perspective where the kind of things they're accustomed to seeing is Star Wars or a Marvel movie or a standard Hollywood movie where every single time you step up to the plate, the hero has to save the world. And instead of doing that kind of thing, I always feel like, what if the world exists and you're just a player in it? You're you're not necessarily someone super important or someone unimportant. You kind of are whatever you make yourself to be. So I go with a very sandbox approach to storytelling as far as that's concerned. I've had adventures that started with, this is the reason all of you know each other and you're all traveling on a road. This is where you came from. This is the direction you're going. What do you want to do?
So I would say a rebuttal, because I heard sandbox as if mine could not be a sandbox.
I don't know railroad. It just doesn't sound.
Yeah, I heard it, even though you didn't say it until just now when you coughed. So, as far as sandboxiness, that is all up to the comfort level you have with going out in different directions and what they do. So, my latest campaign that I'm doing right now, that I won't reveal too many things because they watch this
ruin
stuff
it for everyone.
I have one who definitely researches to make sure I don't give away the ending. So anyway, for my Holding the More Games campaign, I let the characters kind of do a whole bunch of stuff, and a lot of it's character driven because I incorporated everything from their backstories into the story I'm telling. And they inform me how they'd like to break that. Every session or so, they give me a new kind of thing, a new hurdle to overcome to kind of still integrate and see what the world will do based on what the heroes do. And, for the most part, there's a bit of them exploring, there's a bit of them getting into trouble. Oh, James Leslie, that's a good point. This is the perfect time to feed false information. You're right.
Yeah.
Maybe I will disclose the information in the story. Yeah, so it's a perfect time to kind of integrate what the player, confusing senses. It's a good time to be able to, you get a length of time that you can integrate all their different little bits of stories into the overall campaign. You don't have to be like, there's some people who like to say, well, one of you is a prince and a disposed prince or something, and let's go retake your kingdom. That's really straightforward into...
You there?
Just stop
you
that.
good?
I had to stop that music because it started doing Morse code, and I have no idea why. Anyway, that's what you do. That's what happens when you don't put your music on repeat. So, I had several of the people's stories integrated into the main storyline, but I didn't make it so they being who they are determine whether or not the story can be complete. So, I mean, it sounds gruesome, but they could technically all die over the next series of adventures, and I could still do my story. It just might take a little bit to weave in the new player characters into what's going on. So, well, anyway, what would you say?
In the way I do things, I have my greatest challenge during world building because I have to develop a status quo for everything. So I have to say, if two kingdoms are at war, why isn't one of them winning? If one of them is winning, why is it winning? What did they just lose, or what did someone just win? What is the state of the world right now when I introduce the players? And so for me, I kind of get to have some of the feeling of being a player as a storyteller, because everything the players do can impact random things I've already written about. So I kind of, after the game's over, like, I have 2 weeks before my next game or whatever, I'll have kind of another little world building session where I'm like, well, what's happened in the world since the last time they were running through? Sometimes they have a meaningful impact. Other times they're flies. They don't matter at all. The world just keeps churning without them. So, yeah.
Got it. Hey, I mean, you can develop that at any time into a larger story. And I would also say that all of my plots and things don't connect to the main story. It's not like everything they interact with is pertinent to what's going on.
Right.
Sometimes saving a farmer's farmhouse or field from goblins is just saving a farmer's farmhouse from field and field from goblins.
Yes, absolutely. It's really I think the two sides of the coin are doing things that are furthering some massive overarching primary plot line, and then doing things that have nothing to do with anything. They're just completely unrelated. I had a group of players, they just decided they were going to go through these. I was like, yeah, there are these gnarly swamplands here. And they were like, well, you said they're gnarly, so there must be something interesting in there. So they just immediately decided that they would start camping and traveling through the swamplands. And they ended up butchering an entire village of not really evil lizard people. Like, those lizard people were more or less in the wrong place at the wrong time when the slaughter fest of players came through. I mean, they were literally just like hucking fireballs into village huts.
Yikes.
And I'm like, some of them are children, and they're like, good, the children won't be able to grow up and take revenge. Kill those too. And I was like, okay, well, all right, whatever you guys want to do.
Yikes.
So.
Well, yeah, you can't necessarily predict what the players are going to do. And I've, 50% of the time I've failed when I'm trying to predict what the players are going to do. So, completely understandable that sometimes they just go off in their own little direction.
I think this kind of speaks to what both of us would essentially be trying to accomplish. Which one of us is having maybe a harder time wrangling the players into what we'd like to do? My method of building is an adventure tree. I build a basis, which is my world building, and then everything that's happening in the world is essentially a branch. And anytime someone wants to do something, typically I have a general answer for it. I don't know what NPCs live in that town, but I know there's a town there and I know what it does, maybe the primary things it produces, what kinds of people would live there. So I can kind of, hop around and jump around what I'd like to do with the session.
And when you do a lot of world building, I think that's a lot easier to when you're comfortable with doing a lot of world building. I think that's a lot easier to do than when you're kind of, I guess, there's a path you assume that they're going to be taking based on what the information you're giving them.
Yeah.
And when you're doing like a big story arc rather than a whole bunch of little ones, I think you're going to have an easier time kind of leading them in a direction. Yeah, true. They are just sometimes going to go off into whatever. But when you've got those kind of players, are you?
That's like the only players I ever get. You get some incredibly nice players. If your players are willing to go along with you, if they're willing to, if they're willing to go along with what you're telling them, that is amazing. But my players are typically like, well, monkey wrench time.
Well, yeah. Okay, there's a difference between going along with somebody and then also discovering through questioning and investigation different aspects of the world and being spiteful to your DM.
Yes.
So I feel like on a level of spite to nice, you're like dialing over towards them being just to the spite. Do you know what I mean? There?
I call it saucy. The players that I get are typically quite saucy.
Yeah.
And we have murder hobos causing genocide. Yeah, that's that's pretty close to it. Nerdator Doug said, I'd like to have a couple of simple ideas, let players explore them, and kind of weave a story around what they do and my between session thoughts about it. And that's very similar to what I do. I just kind of, here's some idea of what's going on in the world, and then people kind of go do their thing. And Dubba, you had a question, but I'm not sure if that's directed at us. Yeah, Peanut's quite saucy today. Does this apply to session 0 or just by session by session basis? If you clarify that question, I will answer it. I'm not sure what you mean. What's the title? It's essentially tonight's title is Nate versus Kienata. Which one do you like better?
We're talking about short story arcs and the grand designs. Basically, like GM tips for that.
I tell lots of small stories. I'm like a comic series where, like, for the most part, everything's resolved by the end of one comic book. But every once in a while, you have 3 or 5 comics in length, each comic maybe being a session where things the story continues. So,
yeah, and I guess I'm more like novel version rather than, I don't know, like the superhero movies. You get like 2 hours and they go from assembling into a group to devastating whatever has come in through some portal or fighting off some evil and saving the day. And yeah, I don't have that happen as frequently, I guess. And I also don't have it be as big an impact. And there are a lot of personal story stuff happening. So,
we probably should also address session length.
Okay.
How long would you say your sessions are with the overarching story?
All right. So for the overarching story, I have about 4-hour sessions.
Yeah. So typically my game sessions involve dinner in the middle.
Okay. That's a totally different animal there.
Yeah. Typically my game sessions are everybody around a dinner table. I cooked something tasty. We play for 4 hours. Then we stop and we eat dinner and talk for an hour. And then we play for another 4 hours and then we're done. And usually I do one like 8-hour session like that every 2 weeks.
Now that's in person, right?
Right. That's always in person. That's nothing like that online. I could eat in front of people as part of the session. This is so good.
Yeah,
Slow
I hope everyone else ordered their delicious strombolis and cheesesteaks.
Yeah, exactly. Cheesesteaks. I like how you went directly to food you like.
Well, I haven't had a cheesesteak in a while for my new diet, so It's cheesesteak just isn't the same without the roll. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Of course, different parts of the country, they don't even know what cheesesteaks are. So it's sad, but true.
Do you plan this out at session 0 or on a session by session basis as a DM based on players you're going to have? For me, I'm fairly, I basically have a GMing style, and that's just how I GM now. I've done pre-written material like supplements and stuff like that, where those are like save the world things. But if this is just a bunch of people want to play D&D and I'm going to run it, basically I just sit down and say, okay, I have a bunch of players and they're going to play. I need to come up with the town or city. I love making everyone start in a city. The city that everyone's in. I come up with the city, I give them a general idea of the city, and then either I use one of my existing worlds or I literally sit down and write an entirely new world before the first session. So, yeah. Sometimes the world building happens while we're sitting at the table making characters. I will literally be like, cool, what'd you say you want to be? Oh, sweet, lizardman? Awesome. So you came from a tribe. Like that's literally how it comes out. So
yeah, I do have a bit of that, even though I have like my understanding of what I'm going to do with the story arc, but I have a bit of that kind of inserted. So there's, I'd say, like, I divide up all the other kind of adventures I may have based on the players and how I've incorporated them in. So that it's a bit less kind of seat of the pants, but also, again, you don't know how this. If you're putting something down, you're laying it down, and they're not. You're like, oh, I don't recognize that, or I don't remember that from my own backstory. You're kind of like, hey, you found this? I didn't even make you look for it with a search or investigate or anything like that. You just found it. How about you look at it and try to remember back a couple of weeks ago when you made your character? Yeah, so there's that. So you never know when a player is just going to forget part of their backstory. That seemed important in session 0. It seemed really important in session 0. So much so, you made an adventure that included it. And then they just dropped out of their head, and then you stare at them really hard. And it doesn't. You're like, come on, read my mind. I don't want to have to remind you about something, because then it's obvious, and that screws up the whole coolness factor of putting it in there for them in the first place.
I try not to reach into character backstories unless I've already done some preamble and I feel like they get where I'm going and they're on board. You know what I mean? Like you, Nate, you grew up in the city streets of Bulgarod and you were a street urchin and you found this really awesome knife, and ever since you've had it, you feel like it makes you lucky. You've had incredible unexplainable events happen to you ever since you found this knife. And then at some point later in the story, if I want to talk about that knife, I'm going to do some form of preamble. I'm going to be like, well, there's this guy and he's looking for this knife and he calls it the luck blade and blah, blah, blah. And at some point it's going to click and you're going to be like, oh no, he wants my knife. Yeah. So, Angron said, okay, so I just joined in and I was hoping to get tips for sandbox and grand design. Tips. Give me your 5-minute pitch.
My 5-minute pitch for grand design?
I want your 5-minute pitch for grand design, and then it'll be mine.
Right. Okay. It's not going to be organized, but here I go. All right. The main thing with grand design is the players feel like they can build up their characters towards something. Whether that's conquering a great evil, saving a city from a siege, a war siege or something like that, freeing some kind of druid spirit or whatever that's going to reforest the land. Whatever that is, they know that as they march towards that goal, they're going to achieve something. Now, they might not know that that's the actual goal. They just might have an inkling that bad stuff's happening in the area, and they don't want to see that be the case. So you've got a little bit of, based on what type of player you have, Kienata, You can have buy-in for making the world a better place. And if you've got those type of people and those type of characters, because it can be either one. It can be either the player playing whatever the heck they feel like, who is not an altruistic person, and then the player character who's like, well, the player playing that character is like, yeah, this guy's not a nice guy. He wouldn't go do this for nothing. He wants to get paid. So you've got those different levels. But if you know what you're dealing with in the beginning and what your raw material is for the story, which is the players and their characters, then I feel like it's more rewarding to have a kind of like build up of a story in some manner. Now, I would say that I try and round out a few stories, smaller stories that happen in the grand design. Hey, I definitely have more. It's been not even a minute. You're breaking my stride here.
Yeah.
All right, where was I? Okay, so I think that you can have a lot of impactful little stories that all fall under that big major arc without derailing it and having people go off into whatever. And if you do those things and they include the characters and include, as we were talking about, their background or what they desire was something they want to move towards. So some people say, well, I've got a story arc for my character I want to do. So one of the recent characters, a lot of his company was killed. He wanted to avenge them, but right now he was kind of drinking in bars, and that was what he was doing. He wasn't avenging them at all. He was taking a break from the whole adventure scene. And he wants to eventually overcome that and move back towards this heroic figure. But that's a personal arc. So there's a lot of people with personal arcs in the game, and I incorporate them in some fashion that they're going to get different pieces. And that's going to invest them at least in those story elements, if not in the overall story element based on how you tie them in. So I say do a session 0, get player buy-in by making things important to them, important to parts of the story. Not the main thing, like, for example, we were talking, I think, before we even started it, about, like, dispossessed prince. I'd say don't make one of your characters a dispossessed prince, because that's, like, a central character out of everything. And while it may feel like there's a central character in some of my games, there's not really.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of incorporate and give characters different times to shine and be invested more heavily by giving them that like different parts of it. So what's what I want to say? As far as tips, I'd say session 0 is important. Incorporating and integrating small kind of just little things along the way, even if it's just something on a desk or a book in the library that reminds them of what they would look for. Like, well, a good example is drawing them into a story. If somebody goes to a library, do you know, as the DM, what books might interest their character? If you do, then you utilize that knowledge towards involving them in the story. So little things like that could go a long way for players that aren't just murder hobos or want to see how much pain they can cause you and how you can try and hide it as they destroy everything you love about your game. So anyway, I don't think I'm done, but that I'm going to be done.
That's there. I'm sure it's a 5-minute pitch, Nate. 5 minutes.
I'm watching the clock.
Yeah.
I had a minute left at least.
It's my 5-minute pitch is definitely not 5 minutes. Adventure tree. Adventure tree, adventure tree, adventure tree. If you want to GM the way I GM, my method of GMing is plan out lots of variables, do lots of world building. That's easy for me to say because I really enjoy doing it. But do lots of world building, plan out lots of variables, be prepared for unknowns, and then plop your players down in whatever you feel like the appropriate spot is. Flying on an airship, hanging out in a circus, it doesn't matter. Wherever you think they need to go. And then back away slowly and watch the magic happen. I have never been let down by a group of players. Never. Never. Players will either get in trouble, cause trouble, find trouble. You don't have to worry about it. Your players will do a better job writing the adventure. There's like 5 of them or 8 of them. There are more people there. They're just going to do an awesome job writing that adventure for you. You really GMing with my method is reactive. Be ready to react. Be ready to do some impromptu role playing. But yeah, adventure tree. The adventure tree is everything to me. If I didn't have the adventure tree, I would not know how to deal with people because people are so random and unpredictable.
Well, I like the challenge of trying to wrangle them.
Wrangle them. Yeah.
Hey, if one carrot doesn't work, how about 50 different colored carrots?
Yes.
Sometimes they're just going to be sometimes they're just not going to pick what you want. And I do have to I would agree that when the players change the story, I'd say 90% of the time it's better than what I came up with. And another part of, I would say, a tip for grand design is don't be afraid to change that grand design, especially when the players, they'll like, oh, what if it's this? What if it's that? And you're like, oh, one of those was actually better than my original story plot. I think it is now the story plot.
Yeah, be adaptable.
Yeah.
Be adaptable.
I joke with Kienata. It's like, my adventure, I say I'm planning something, but really, like, until I've said it and the PCs have heard it and understood it, it's like everything is Schrodinger's cat's version of an adventure. It could be anything, really. I attacked them, my recent party, I attacked them with somebody who was an assassin. And until they captured the assassin, I didn't know necessarily what I was going to say. And when they captured the assassin, I was like, all right, now I need to figure out what's the actual, like, the nitty-gritty of why this occurred. I had a nebulous idea of what I wanted to do with it. But I had to really figure it out when I knew they were going to question this person with truth serum and zones of truth and other things. I was just like, oh, you put me on the spot here, guys.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's the ability to be mutable, to be able to change quickly given the environment. You have to be able to adapt quickly in order to deal with the demands of players. I would say for either of our methods, you're trying to adapt to continue a storyline, when in many ways that could be considered much more difficult than creating a world and then just turning people loose in it.
And specifically with that, the encounter I spoke of earlier, I expected that character just to die. So it was kind of like a throwaway character in a way, but actually them capturing that character made me have to figure out, like, a really creative solution to what that was actually about. And I was like, wow, there's a whole arc of story that's just happening now because of character intervention in ways I didn't think was going to happen. And I'd say the story is actually way richer now and more interesting based on how I've adapted to the player characters. The players and the player characters' choices.
Buddha said, I've been DMing for a short time and I have a few plans for each session, and I've been hiding them in a job board and the local guild hall. And this is the repeated use of like job boards, guild halls, postings at the local inn, things like that. I feel like those are much more modern occurrences in GMing style. When I started GMing, the most common way to get a job was someone would come running up to you screaming with a problem. A priest approaches you.
Or there's
the monastery.
Or there's a mysterious person in the inn.
Yeah, exactly.
Who may or may not have a map. Yeah, so there's that.
I can remain unseen if I want to, but vanishing entirely.
Hey, it's a good trope. That's why it's a super trope.
Yeah, yeah,
Meeting in a
exactly.
tavern, meeting destiny in a tavern. That's how
Okay,
it's been.
so what do you think the differences are in session zero if both of us are trying to come up with our own methods of doing this? What do you run into anything specific in session zero for your grand campaign? Do you ever say, hey, you guys, we should have a paladin, or you probably don't want to play an evil character, or anything like that come up? Or is session zero kind of uh, uh, copy and paste for you, just like all your other session zeros?
Um, I don't fully understand the copy paste part, but I'm gonna say session
Well,
zero for me. Session zero for me is a time where I get to figure out what kind of group I'm going to have of players, because maybe no one wants to play a cleric. And I go, okay, that's probably going to change my DMing style. We've got all kinds of stuff on, all, different parties and makeups, and what do you do about it on the YouTube channel. But basically, that's kind of like where I start to say, all right, certain types of encounters just won't work very well, or they're going to be very difficult, so I have to keep that in mind. So I'll start thinking about that kind of stuff, like, but that doesn't really impact the overall story necessarily. That just kind of changes your your combat, GM combat style, I would say, a little bit,
mm,
or it can inform you how you're going to the party could run into problems. So giving them creative solutions out, or sticking in some extra healing potions in, or all that kind of stuff is ways of getting around that. So that's like other type of things. But for session zero, I would say major takeaways is I try to kind of grab bits and pieces from the players that they want to have in their character and kind of develop with their character. And then we kind of hash out not party roles. They kind of do that on their own, but we kind of talk about the party makeup and how they could all interact or know each other. And that's the major thing in session zero. I do session zero so that I don't have 4 hours of getting the party together in session one.
mm-hmm.
And it's just, we're all kind of group storytelling how everybody knows each other or knows of each other, or why are you all in the same town. So that's the kind of thing. The things that stick in my mind is I had a librarian. I was like, well, I have an abbey with books, so you're there. I had a wild elf coming from the western forests, which is basically just a wood elf that's nomadic, who's hunting for something. So I was like, all right, you're in Stationton and you know some people. I had a dwarf who's merchanting right now, so he's drinking in a tavern. And I had a gnome recently out of the Feywild, kind of looking into what happened to his clan. Gnomish village, whatever you'd call them. His village just kind of up and disappeared while he was stuck in the Feywild for a while. So I'm like, all right, what's to say? Well, the wild elf is traveling east to do whatever she wants to do, so she's in the Stationton right now. The merchant is on the merchant roads. He's in Stationton right now. So kind of like it all converges at this one spot in time where everybody seems to be around the area. So that's kind of how I like to round that up.
We kind of have a conversation going on in chat right now, and I just wanted to agree with one of the comments that was thrown in. And I had a bit of advice for anyone who's struggling with doing any kind of voice acting during your games. Iron Dragon said, it does seem weird at first, but doing voices or changing how I sit, maybe putting my hands differently, just small things to show the difference in NPC can make a big difference. And I completely agree with this. Small mannerism changes, or any amount of voice acting you can pull off. The one piece of advice I would give to anyone who wants to do a different voice in the game they're doing: confidence. If you do it confidently, your players will buy into it, regardless of whether you feel like you're doing a good job or not. So be confident when you're voice acting. If you're putting in some ridiculous, you want to do a haggard old man who needs to find things behind him, and he's gonna throw pots and pans everywhere, then just be confident, really sell it. If you can get the confidence down, people will instantly buy into those voices. They'll be like, oh, cool, that guy sounds crazy. Many times, even if you feel like you botched it and did a terrible job, you'll probably get compliments after the game session. They'll be like, man, I loved that character. You just got to keep a straight face, sound ridiculous, and sell it. So, yeah, that's
those
there
are
you
the
go.
things.
I do a lot of voices when I do it. So
yeah, and another thing I would say is sometimes body posture. If I'm doing like a sneaky rogue, I'm going to hunch my shoulders. I'm going to present myself smaller. If I'm doing an old man, I will shake. And that seems to be just what I need to get into old man mode. And then I just have to make sure that not all my old men sound the same. And sometimes that just might just be extending a few of the vowel sounds differently. And I have a really kind of haughty kind of master alchemist and herbalist called Master Ishtar. Oh, yeah, Rick Vest, Master Ishtar. He's in the chat. And I have too much fun playing that character. I kind of want to make it so that he just has all the quests from now on. They have to talk to Master Ishtar for it.
Yeah, it's and it doesn't, you don't have to be putting on professional animation quality voices in order to be able to do some voice acting. Come up with a cool, if you have a cool voice that you've been doing, you're like, yeah, this guy's super evil and the absolute incarnation of death itself. And you're doing that for yourself, get used to doing it. Like, do it in a mirror and just keep a straight face at first, you know? And I know this is totally off topic, but I'm super passionate about doing all kinds of crazy voices when you GM. People, like, I've had players who were like back in their seats, like, what? So you can blow people away with it.
It's an important set piece when, especially if you're doing theater to the mind and you don't actually have set pieces. It's really nice to be able to tell the NPCs apart.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that's definitely something. And you know what? That's another thing. In Session 0, people go over, they kind of go over the type of voices that they want to do for their characters. And you can kind of figure out if that's going to work long term. Because sometimes like if someone was shouting all the time, I don't know who would do that, but, let's just say someone was going to, I think I want to shout all the time as my character. It's like, that's going to be fun for a little tiny bit, and then it's not going to be fun to listen to. So that's something to keep in mind. Or like sometimes it's not, you can't sustain it. And that's one of the things. You can have a really crazy off their voice or raspy voice if you're going to have a very in there every once in a while mail order dinner with Kienata. It just gets shipped, dropped off with Amazon drones to everybody, hot and fresh.
Dice in hand. All right, people, get to the table. Hodgepodge Syntaxia had an excellent comment out there. Energetic and committed might be better ways to think of it than confident. If you go all out and bring a high energy level to the table for your NPCs, it's pretty rare for players to not enjoy it. And I agree with that as well. Absolutely. So, magically mutated giant owls. What voice would you do for that? He stopped me at one point and said, Dad, you're kind of scaring me. It was fun.
Excellent. I think magically mutated giant owls should scare you. So.
Paul Jamal, if that happened, you were doing it right, sir.
Yeah.
Congratulations, you've earned +1 nerd point. Be on your way. Dad, this is freaking me out. Excellent.
I wanted to draw out some real fear from you.
Yeah. Oh man. So yeah. So I think the major thing you need to do when you're trying to do the short chunks is keep an eye on immediately attainable goals. And if you'd like to throw something out there that you could hang on to for later, like for instance, cities for me, I've had players that had 5 sessions, 8-hour sessions in one city, because there's so much to do in cities. There's so much to do in cities. There's so many different groups that are at odds with each other. I mean, there could just be Neil the Merchant, and Neil the Merchant's a greedy, nasty guy, and he wants to control. I know, Neil for everything. And he wants to control. I said I did voices. I didn't do names. He wants to control all of the trade in silk in the city. That desire to control that trade could be more than enough to push out several different adventures. So just one city can be enough sometimes.
Oh yeah, especially when you start including things like thieves guilds and just different guild merchant rivalry.
Yeah.
And then politicians and aristocracy and all that kind of stuff. That can kind of all trickle down to affect general people's livelihood. And that's where you can kind of start, especially at low levels. You can kind of see how I'm trying to take your talking about a city into a grand narrative.
Yeah, try.
And well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like you're saying, you just like the adventure tree thing, but I'm saying the adventure tree could have a final beautiful design. I mean, you say a tree. What if it's a whole bunch of grass that gets on fire and then it grows back? You're saying a tree, so it obviously has a final design to it.
Well, there really isn't a final design. Once you've explored a branch, you've gone as far as you can go in that direction, and that could be a shoreline. You've seen all the cities over here. You've explored a huge empty castle that I left just lying around just in case somebody wanted to, a castle, let's see what's in it. Well, nobody's been in it for 300 years, so some weird stuff lives here now. You know, so like just fun stuff like that. You may also find, especially for the adventure tree method, you may also find, this is for me anyway, because I like the creative side of GMing. It's refreshing.
Okay.
You can, like, I'll have players go into a relatively new area that I haven't written a ton of material for, and I'll be like, okay, this is a great stopping point. In 2 weeks, we'll pick up. I'm going to make ribs and potatoes, and we'll do stuff then. And then 2 weeks, I know, do you want ribs and potatoes now? I do. Made me hungry. But I'll pick up 2 weeks later, but I'll have that entire 2-week period to really sink my teeth into what I want to be in this new area. It's kind of like getting to write a brand new campaign every couple of weeks. It's, for me, I can't think of anything more fun than that. I'd rather do that than play, which is probably why I always end up the GM.
That's a good point. I like that. I like that aspect. And I would come back at you with saying that when you don't railroad your players too hard, or you minimally railroad them, they will add stuff to your story that it makes it kind of almost unrecognizable. It's basically the difference between, let's go with this tree analogy. I kind of like it. So you've got a barren tree, and then you have a tree at full summer with its full bloom, its blossoms, its giant leaves. You can't see the underlying branches mostly. You can just see the trunk. So you've got you would think that is flowers, leaves, and a trunk, when underneath is a tree that you can't see. So I would argue that you can get, if you basically build the framework, you can get a full cool looking tree with a tree with a soul in it.
Yeah, Nate, you're evil.
Yeah. That hit me so much funnier than I thought it was going to. I read it out into my head and then I read it out loud, and it just got funnier.
I think even if you don't, like, here you go. All of the major characters in Game of Thrones are D&D players.
Okay.
So let's say you have a table and you have about 12 players.
Gotcha.
If you read the books and saw the story, would you know which version of GMing you went with? No. You wouldn't know whether that was a grand design or a completely random buildup. It came out that the story kind of is a grand design, but
yes, the player story is not the grand design, I would say, except for only a few of the characters. But there's a story that's happening in that world, whether or not the players are going to interact with it.
Right. Right. And I always have larger stories going on that people may not necessarily care about. I had a group of players that I was like, this huge army is marching towards the main city. What do you want to do? And you know, of course, I'm really simplifying things right now.
Yeah.
But basically the players were like, well, that city is going to be decimated. We leave. And I was like, okay. And so I was left with this idea of basically like, how do I want this to play out? My 2-week downtime was writing about the death and destruction that took place in the city. And the players, meanwhile, are like 200 miles away, chilling on a beach, trying to decide what to do next. Like, that's what happened. So, and I, you know, yeah.
Bless your heart, Kienata. I'd be like, I am totally murdering these PCs. This is the 7th time I'm done with this.
I said,
burning it down.
Everybody must die. Like I said, it's all about what you're willing to deal with as a GM. If you really enjoy world building, then when your players throw you for a twist, you're like, oh, sweet, I got to make something out there. And when your players aren't throwing you for a twist, you're like, man, I had this planned 2 months ago. Go ahead. You can't mess me up. I know what's in the city. So, yeah.
So we've got a few talks of weaving the small stories into a longer story. So it lets your players work into it. And also lets them feel more involved. And I would agree that that is a method, especially if you do session 0, and then you say like, all right, here's how they're going to be involved in this story.
Mm-hmm. But Kyle Ellis said, no matter how good the story you create is, you will get way more involvement and enjoyment from players by facilitating their story, not using them as pieces to tell your own. And I couldn't agree with that more, especially as a GM who focuses heavily on world building. I know that a huge number of my parts, a huge amount of my work won't get used, but I don't care. That doesn't make a difference to me because ultimately the players are going to tell me what the world's doing.
Well, that's one of the negatives of over planning everything.
Maybe I do that.
If you well, I mean, it's a negative if you don't mind. I mean, if you don't mind, it's not a negative. But if you're like, I'm frustrated because they didn't do this whole thing that I was planning to have them do. It's like, well, I mean, there are player agency and choice has to factor into it.
Right.
Otherwise, they'll feel it and they'll feel when you're dragging them in a direction, and they'll start to not like it at all, or they'll get frustrated, or they'll act out in other ways, like killing NPCs you want to use for some purpose, spitefully. Anyway, Rick Vest, I don't like to burn things down a little too much. Those were fire methods. Thank you very much.
Nevin Rawl said, best grand game design I think I ever had was a sorcerer trying to remove magic from the world. He had an excellent argument when the final showdown happened. And I'll be honest with you, there are lots of good arguments for why magic is bad. They look very similar to many of the people with superpowers are dangerous arguments, and a lot of those. There's lots and lots of perfectly logical lines of reason you can follow for why it's a bad thing. Leave lots of options to lead them to those levels so they feel involved.
Yeah, and I would say as part of the grand design and the big narrative storytelling, I think some people are making it a little too black and white in the comments about the stark contrast of like this is not total freedom versus prison world for storyline. This is, I would say, on my grand design concept, it's just more about having many sessions all leading towards something. And yes, if your players do a 180 and just go off into the sea, literally go off into the sea, you're like, well, I didn't make any pirates, but I'm gonna have to now and figure that out. So that comes about, but at the same time, I guess, I mean, if you were having this happen once particular place, like let's say they're trying to do a ritual somewhere and that's like your big bad thing in 10 levels from now or whatever. And you're like, okay, this is going to be, you know, however many sessions, and then this is going to happen. I was like, but now they're off in the wilderness of the, you know, on another continent. So what the heck am I going to do with this? I was like, well, there's two ways of looking at it. You could say, well, I'll just save it for when they come back, if they ever do. Or, because they might not. Or you can go and say, well, I'll let it happen. They knew it was going to happen. I'll just let it happen. I mean,
that's what I do.
I didn't think that they weren't going to do it, but now that they aren't, well, now I get to envision what happens to this part of the world because of it.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say is, you know, as you know, take it easy on the pushing them towards your story, because in the end, like many people have said in the comments, and my comment about, you know, there's this giant contrast between these two things in the end. As long as you don't like try and make it some kind of purist thing where you're like, well, I'm telling my story, you guys just happen to be playing in it. If it's more cooperative, you can still have cooperative and grand design together.
So Ramon Dozel has a question, and we both have a lot to say on this topic. More magic equals more problems? Question mark.
More magic equals a better tomorrow. Yes and no. It's just like anything. Technology, let's assume it's equivalent to technology and what the impact on a person's life. You can drop a nuke on people, and you can also basically, I mean, I don't know. I heard there was a head transplant recently. Did that go successfully, or I don't recall. Someone in chat might know. But so like, yeah. So everything from, you know, practically regrowing organs is not too far in the future. And you can also obliterate hundreds of thousands of people at once. But, you know, so those are two sides of something that you get. So with magic, I would expect that eventually people would have, like, especially if it's a lot of magic, well, you know, there's meteor shower, meteor storm, whatever it's called. I don't remember, swarm, something. But
I think it's meteor swarm.
What if there was some kind of ridiculously high level ritual for dropping asteroids on the planet where you wanted them, and you could just like take out an entire empire? Be like, yeah, I could have never fought that 10,000 epic knights, but I can sure drop an asteroid on their face and they're gone. So yeah, so that level of warfare could be something I could see happening in a high magic campaign setting.
I personally believe that more magic does equate to more problems. When I run games, spellcasters are informed ahead of time that they'll be using a custom spellcasting system that I wrote. It just gives you more utility. But there aren't 7th and 8th level and 9th level spells. Those spells don't exist. Spellcasting stops at 6th level. And things in the world happening, like you've traveled to another plane, that is incredibly unlikely to happen. Like no, you'll be on this planet in this world, and the world will be more than I know. I'm my own guy.
You're like killing my cat here. My magic cat familiar is meowing. Unbelievable. Blasphemy. That's what I am hearing you say.
Well, the higher level spells caused more headaches than they did solutions.
Yeah, and
in my particular case.
I understand. I can imagine the type of players that you've described to me all this evening and previous evenings.
Yeah.
I can imagine having some 8th and 9th level spells like Wish and Tsunami and other things. Yeah, I wouldn't want that in their hands either. I would be scared.
I had card counters with the deck of many things. Why I would let people have that. But anyway, so the deck of many things. Yes, and I had players going, okay, the next 3 cards, one of them is the Wish spell. So we got rid of this one, and we got rid of this one. And so you'd have one player who'd be like, all right, I'll draw them, and this is what we'll wish for, and then we'll do this again. And so you had other people in the group that were like, okay, we'll be the ones that draw the other cards. So they draw hoping not to get wish because they had one person who was going to fix everything when they got to the end. But I monkey pawed that entire group to death. At the end of the session, I was like, here's the deal. We can pretend tonight didn't happen or you're all dead. That's how this goes.
and you gave them the deck of many things. You just like sabotaged their group. I had no way of knowing that things would go so completely off the rails. They had a discussion. All of the players had a discussion outside game. Yeah. Outside game with what they wanted to do during the next game session. So when I came to the game session as the GM, I was the only one out of the loop. Oh, they dropped it on you.
Yeah.
Like,
they were just
get
like
one up on him.
Yeah, they were like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We want to start with the deck of many things, and he's going to start drawing cards. Are you ready? And I'm like, I'm still sitting on my GM screen. What are you guys talking about? And they're like, no, we've got a system. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm going to have to kill everybody. I can feel it already. You're all dead, but go ahead.
See, what I would have done is not told them until they all said what they're drawing, that it resets for every player. It's a fresh deck, always.
See, mine...
or it's 2 decks together. The casino is like 8 decks. You could just draw death each time. Or 5 wishes.
Yeah, if you'd said 5 wishes, they would have taken a shot at 5 wishes.
Yeah, but you're gonna draw all the terrible stuff for who knows how long.
These are one of these, like, this is one of those learning experiences. Like the first time I ran a con game, and I told players, however stupid it may have been, I wasn't in the loop. I didn't really get how con games went. I told players they could bring their own characters. That will never happen again.
Pre-gens
not for any amount of money. I basically had people who like were Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. Like, yeah, so what do we do? And I'm like, it's a 8th level adventure. What did you bring? Yeah, so Iron Dragon? Oh, I'm missing all kinds of stuff.
Oh, thanks, James Leslie. According to the National Post, a head transplant was successfully done. See, so better living through magic? My argument is you're going to get a whole bunch of good stuff that's going to raise the level of survivability of the populace, but you're also going to have terrible doomsday stuff happen. And that's what the heroes are for in your grand design story arcs. They're supposed to stop the apocalyptic magic stuff from happening.
Yeah.
They're the stopgap measure. Anything that falls through the cracks, that's what the heroes are for.
Yeah. I love the idea of being able to allow people to explore the world. If I were playing, I would want a GM who GM'd my way of GMing, but it does not always. You end up with players who realize they have complete freedom, and the option to gain power is always the option taken. If there is a road to power, like if they were Frodo, they'd be like, well, I have the one ring. I'm putting it on. I'm going to try and control things with it. Do the ring raids listen to me? Like they would not. They would immediately explore whatever power gaming they could. So
I will admit that my first decade of play, any wizard I had wanted to be a lich.
Oh, yeah.
Just saying right now, confession time. Oh, yeah. Pretty much a decade of just, lich time. I'm working for it. Closest I ever got. was being a bald, doppelganger-looking, poor, twisted, abused wizard with a book of doom.
Ranger Roy said, Kienata, do your big bad evil guys have 7+ level spells? Nope. The only time I bring in 7th and higher level spells is when I think it's a kind of thing that would know ancient magic or old magic. And it's always something that the players, like, they know that it's being cast. It's so powerful and so old and so like Fazroda, like the voices in Skyrim, like it's so incredibly so deeply magical that you can tell someone cast a 7th level spell a mile away because the weather changes and the winds pick up and it starts gently drizzling or a fog rolls in. Like, it's a big deal when someone uses a spell like that. Yeah, rituals, dragons, and godlike. That's exactly right, Ramon. I tend to go with like first of all, you should always be scared of dragons. Dragons are terrifying. But yeah, like a really, really ancient dragon, if it could cast spells that high, the players would be under the impression that messing with it wouldn't garner XP and treasure. It would just be a death sentence. I guess to some degree, I like to show limitations. Like, there really isn't, like, there's not, well, if I level up more, I can go do that. It's like, no, that's a god. Like, there's no if I level up more, it's a god. Like, that's not something you can deal with.
If an entire army of adventurers comes against
them, he would still just destroy you.
Stomp them.
Yeah. Like, there are no stats for deities in how I play.
Well, definitely don't stat it if you don't want them to kill it.
Yeah. I killed a player for getting smart with a dragon, was snarky for too long, became lunch. I don't like to strike down players. But Iron Dragon brings up Vecna. Well, that's a completely different setting. Like I said, I really enjoy world building, so it's not a problem to say, oh yeah, I just write my own setting every time. I make massive, fully constructed worlds every time I want to run a D&D session. But I enjoy it. I have fun making the world. So for people that don't have as much fun doing that, Vecna might be a better direction.
Not stream related, but that is really cool that they confirmed the gray rendering. Is that renderling for Mordecai's Tome of Foes? Did I hear that? Am I reading that right? Yeah, gray render. Okay. I got that guy right here.
Oh, cool.
Ted and Dave did a video on the gray render with I think some goblins. I don't know if it's out yet, but it sounded really fun. And I was like, oh, it sounds so fun. I'll have to use it in a game sometime. The gray renders are pretty neat. So, what would you say about, since we're, I know you like to kind of hedge magic, like kind of like lower the power level of it. So, what about bending rules so people get kind of like interesting familiars rather than kind of what would fall within the like rules as written familiars, or let's say animal companion. Let's say I like animal friendship, some things like a giant bear or something that would be kind of like out of my power level at the time.
Right, you're level 1 and we're playing a game.
And I find a bear and I successfully animal friendship it.
Okay.
And then over time, I'm trying to train it and like get it to like me more and more, and I keep casting it all the time. Is that something that you could say, even though, because kind of it like happened through RP, or I'm just curious. I don't know the answer.
For me, that's the same kind of choice as Ramon Dizol comes to the table and says, Kienata, is there a half ogre? I want to be a half ogre. I just want to be a huge half ogre guy. You come to me and you say, I want to be a gnome paladin and I want to ride a bear. Okay. Honestly, even if you end up with a small advantage at level 1, you've successfully animal friendshiped a giant bear. The bear's in love with you. You have this huge bear. Even if you have a low power advantage, everything evens out at level 5 for choices like that. Unless your race or pet or piece of equipment is so ridiculously powerful that it matters at level 6 and 7 and 8, I'm probably going to say fine. Cool. It's a minor advantage just to begin with. And honestly, like so you got a bear. You can't really go into town with a bear unless you've got it harnessed and stuff. Is it okay with being harnessed? Like there's a lot to think about with stuff like that. So
yeah, I have an obsession with my characters where I try and tame wormling dragons.
I think it'd be really cool. And of course, then you'd have to consider how long does it take for a dragon to age.
It hasn't successfully happened. Just saying. Yeah. Just saying it hasn't successfully happened. But yeah, even if it's like a black dragon, I'll try and grab the egg instead of crush everything and be like, these are evil. I'll be like, I want to raise it as my own.
Everyone finds creatures just like a baby dragon. There you go. Ramon Dizol said, just like a baby dragon that evolves with the character until adulthood. There's always creatures or pets. It's a very common theme for people to be like, I want a really cool pet. I want a really cool familiar or a super awesome mount or whatever. And for the most part, other than the dragon scenario, you're really not going to have a crazy impact on the game that's going to change how the other people in the group get to play. I mean, the people in the group might be like, dude, we've got a bear. We can do this now, which is just awesome. There's nothing like, that's great. So, and as far as like being like, well, I got this dragon egg, you don't know when it's going to hatch. Even if I have it hatched, now you have a baby dragon to deal with that's probably as intelligent as like a 4 or 5 year old. You pretty have
quickly as intelligent as a normal human.
Yeah, you have 4 or 5 year olds. Do you want a 4 or 5 year old that can spit acid?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe this is just going to turn into an awesome RP opportunity for you to be like, I have a baby dragon, but it doesn't listen to me. It spits acid on things. People are scared of it. You can't just roll into town with your baby dragon. So it sounds more like I'm going to get a ton of awesome role play out of you than it does you're going to be overpowered by the numbers. So
yeah, you may eventually say, this is too much trouble, I want to set it free.
Yeah, exactly.
Go into the wild, eat horses and stuff.
Yeah,
be a
please
good dragon.
Be free.
Yes, please be free away from me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Ramon, definitely cool factor or enters into place and overcomes rule. Yeah, the rule of cool, I would say, overrides that definitely.
Yeah. He also said wormlings can be smarter than average humans depending on color.
Yeah,
I would say
Doug said that as well.
Yeah, a white dragon or a black dragon is probably not going to be too bright when it's born, but like a gold dragon when it's born is probably a little bit like a teenager.
Yeah, like oh, I could start wizarding practically based on that.
Yeah. Alex C, hello. What did I miss so far? We've determined that Doug, you're not Doug, that Nate wants a pet dragon. We've determined that.
I'm off my lich kick. It took a decade, but I'm off my lich kick. But I have to say, if the opportunity arises, I always try and befriend little tiny dragons or eggs.
I think everyone should try and befriend a dragon. You're crazy if you don't.
I'm like a kid in the candy store in the what's that? The Tiamat one.
Tiamat one?
Horde of the Dragon Queen? Horde of the Dragon? What the heck is that adventure called? It's one of the early ones for 5e. I don't remember. Anyway, it involves dragons and dragon eggs. And I played in that, and I was just like, yes! Give them all to me! Anyway.
But yeah. The rule of cool. Every player is a different person. And everyone has a story that they want to tell. And the last thing I want to feel like is I stifled someone's ability to storytell because I'm always the GM. That's why I showed up. I have a story to tell. The last thing I'd want to do is get in the way of a player.
Yeah, and as far as bringing it back to the subject matter we're talking about,
Yes.
um, using whichever way you go, either the adventure tree or the fully fledged big story, giant, big giant story arc,
Yes. Save the universe. Stop
will
Thanos with his
save the
Infinity
universe or
Gauntlet.
possibly just save your little corner of it.
Hmm.
Um, Either way, going with one of those, as long as you kind of keep in mind like the rule of cool in a way, as well as considering and like player agency for stuff, I think
Hmm.
people are gonna have fun, even if you just kind of improv and have the little things figured out, but still just kind of like travel wherever their story leads you, or you're always kind of trying to inform them of what's going on in the world, drawing them towards some big plot. I think as long
Hmm.
as you keep those two things in mind, player agency and the rule of cool, everyone's gonna have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Nate has been soldiering through, but he is very sick right now.
Yes, this is like week 2 of me being sick. We've canceled some shows last week, and I was like, I
Hmm.
did not want to cancel this one. So
Exactly.
we're here. I'm actually going to the doctor's tomorrow instead of being on the live chat for Saturday at 2, well, Eastern Standard Time.
Boo.
But hey, doctor's open. And I'm like, I'm going in because it's been too long I've been ill.
Yeah,
And hopefully they're
exactly.
going to give me magic advice that will fix me right away because I'm tired of being sleepy and not getting sleep. And
Oh
being
yeah,
ill.
Peanut is here and vicious and trying to eat my hand. So we're gonna continue through Peanut biting me. Okay, all right. So moving on from overarching stories and smaller stories, just trying to tell a good story. How would you give advice for ending a massive story arc? It's very easy for me to talk about ending a small story arc. But if you're trying to end and wrap up something huge, what advice would you give for something like that? Because that's a monster to approach.
That's a really, I feel like that's a really open-ended question for me
It
anyway. Because
is.
I'm thinking, like, because you have the standard long story arc, like
Well,
you you
there are many
finally
angles.
repelled the invaders, or you've stopped the
Yeah,
terrible ritual.
there are a lot of angles to attack this from. Are you stopping an evil scheme? Are you killing the big bad guy? And some of the more obvious stuff would be a great direction to go. Like how do you wrap up dealing with the big bad guy?
Okay, so you'll kind of get a feel for whether or not your players will kill them, try and capture them, get information out of them, that kind of stuff, or try and bring them to justice. Maybe they don't want to just vigilante them their way through the encounter. Maybe they want to get to the person, capture them, and take them to seek justice someplace.
Mm-hmm.
So wrapping that all up, again, it's kind of how many threads do you have all kind of leading to this person? How many things are going to be done and actually fixed or helped or assisted by that person not being there anymore, whether they've been killed or captured? So I'd say, like, consider what's the aftermath before you say, like, yes, they're coming upon this person and they're going to deal with them.
Right. So I have two questions about that if we're going with the big bad, right? First, have you had groups that actually brought the big bad to justice? Because the kinds of players I've gotten just just murder that poor soul on the spot. Like by the time they get to him, that person has done horrible things and they just kill him off. So
Well, okay, so your big bad might just be your big antagonist,
okay.
which is just contrary to what the player characters desire or the region desires. So they can be, what is it? It's not morally gray. It's just simply they're on the opposing team in essence. They might
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily be a terrible person, but from your perspective, from your group, from your side of it, they look pretty horrible. Definitely not somebody you want to continue letting them do what they're going to do. So, I mean, they don't have to be like sacrificing orphans and like going to drain an entire. They don't have to be the Dragon of Tyr. You know, I made this giant coliseum so that I can drain everyone's life force at once. Isn't that a great idea? Yes. And become a dragon.
And then I took a spear to the chest, but that's besides the point.
Well, you know, you live for too long, you start getting arrogant about stuff.
Mm.
So, with that in mind, you know, is it, you know, the Dragon of Tyr, or is it just a person who has vested interests that are different than the parties, and maybe people are suffering in different towns because this person is controlling the food entering the area.
And that is a very real world problem that happened a lot.
Yeah, starving people.
Taxation would come in, and the taxation would be so heavy that the people would have to sell crops to pay taxes, and people who were able to be subsistence farmers suddenly have to sell the food that they were trying to eat.
Yeah, that they were going to eat and use for seed next year as well.
Yeah, and you never know. Maybe, you know, I love to twist the knife once it's in and be like, well, the reason the taxes are so high is because the king is sending everyone who can carry a sword to fight off evil barbarians who really are bad guys.
And remember back when you were 3rd level and I had some things about the barbarians that you could have gone and dealt with them and you didn't? Well,
now they're a problem.
It's like you made this villain yourself.
Yeah.
So now they're a problem. The king is dealing with it in the way a king would, sending people out to deal with it. And now this person is in their own little slice of the kingdom, screwing around with regular people's lives. And yes, people will starve. Yes, people will have all these things happen to them. But it's more like this person's just, you know, I'm not trying to go to bat for this person. I'm just simply saying he's not like killing people in the street, but yes, people are going to be negatively affected. So you can say, well, yeah, this is a villain. This is a scummy person. We all deal with him. But it might just simply be, well, if we ruin him financially, or if we strong arm him, we could strong arm him into reversing what he's doing. Like he's storing grain so that he can sell it for a huge profit, and everybody can't afford that.
When you say strong arm, do you mean intimidate with bodily harm? Because that's usually what that means. Yeah. Okay.
You're either threatening them in their face.
That's dark. I'm just saying.
Well, no. I mean, while we're talking about, you have all your characters player characters end up killing people.
They're so evil. I have players who are like, we're going to play an all good group. And I'm like, oh, that'll be refreshing. Yeah. And then halfway through, I'm like, this is not good. You're not being good right now.
Oh, yeah. They just trample all over the moral quandaries you put before them.
Yeah. I'm just like
broken dolls. These story arcs.
So, okay. So here's my other question for you. And we have tons of crazy comments. Yeah, I do need a shark glove to play with Peanut. She is brutal.
Oh, man, take his son hostage. Yikes.
So here's the other question. And you've touched on this point in the past, but we haven't recently, I don't think we've ever taken this head on. So I'm a player in your campaign, and you had this big, crazy bad guy who was he was the head of a cultist group, and he's trying to do a bunch of evil stuff. And me and my group, me and Ramon and Niven Rawl and Iron Dragon and Alex C and James Leslie, just everybody in chat that I can see, we've all shown up and we took the big bad guy down, and we assume that's the end of it. Now, when you're doing cleanup, when you're saying, here's your medal, way to go, you stop the big bad, do you do anything with the 5 cultists that got away?
Oh, the 5 cultists that go away?
Right. So there must be...
Big bad falls, the guys are like, we're out of here, this is going south, and you don't catch them.
Right. Those guys ran, or, there was some evil group that was working with this big head cultist, and the players never saw him. Do you ever explore any of those, let's just call them branches?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that I'm gonna give them a little downtime, especially if they've been fighting cultists for like 5 game sessions. You're like, all right, let's dial back the cult a little bit. Let's put another story element to the forefront that could or could not be connected. Give them a breather, and then maybe I might fast forward 6 months and say, hey, seems like there's no crazy threats in the area. Unless you guys want to do something very specific, I could just say you do a whole bunch of stuff over the next 6 months. What do you do? And then that kind of gives that lapse in time, and then you can get back into the story and say, all right, different stuff's happened. You've got different things happening based on what you've done for the past 6 months. And then you might start hearing rumors about cult-like activity, or that there's lights back on in the temple that you thought you overturned and got rid of everybody in.
Well,
I revisit it, just not. I almost give it enough time that they forgot they even fought cultists.
Okay, so this would lead into the next question, which would be, and we have lots of people with their own way. All the time, to my players' consternation, it depends on how big the cult is. They could report to the next head of the cult, which is kind of where I was aiming with that question. The cult could be quiet for a while. Alex C said I would track them down so it won't repeat. That's similar to what my mentality would be. What about, how does downtime affect your large overarching story? Do you build in areas where it's okay to take a pause? Or do you need to plan out? Because for me, if players take downtime, that's just what happens. So for 6 months, I need to write some world history.
Okay, so it will depend, first off, on your players, what they've got going on, but also for your style. So I kind of do the feeling out kind of situation. So in my recent campaign, I just had somebody that they wanted to meet. There wasn't anything super, super urgent happening right just then. Like no one's attacking a town, nothing like great evil's going to happen in the 3 days that they've got to take care of. And I just said, oh, the person's not around, but they're scheduled to come back in a week. So what do you want to do? And let them go through a week of what they wanted to do. That was a short amount of time, but I kind of wanted to see, first off, what they wanted to do with that time. And I didn't want to make it something ridiculous like a month or two.
Yeah.
To start. There's going to be times where, 6 months might pass by. Especially if they've wrapped something up. So I'm trying to get back to your question. So I would say if the players decide, I'm not leaving this town, I've got stuff to do, well, then it might be that either they're just saying, well, I don't really care what you want to do, GM, or they're considering that the stuff they've got on their plate or possible quests or possible threads towards things or hooks, they're saying to themselves, none of these are really urgent enough that I have to take care of them right now. So either you've written that in and that makes sense to everybody and everyone goes, we don't really need to go do that right now. It's not like more people are going to die if we don't do something about this XYZ thing. So that's kind of, it's going to depend. So I wrapped up something that allowed for the players to take that week and not feel like they had to go do something while they're waiting for somebody.
So you don't plan specific times when you're like, okay, all this stuff happened, break time. I just wonder.
I do it two different ways. There's like a drop in urgency at some points after something gets wrapped up. So I would say, I'm assuming there's a good amount of downtime to happen. But if I want to continue some kind of story element and I need a year, first off, I want to kind of warn them that a year is coming up where you could do stuff. Or kind of get that in their head that that could occur, because a year's kind of rough, because unless you've got really players like hunkering down into an area, and a year they could be anywhere. In fact, that might be a good way to transition someplace. So that could also be like a way to transition to a new area, is be like, well, this story is kind of like wrapped up in this area. Unless the players want to stay in this area, we can kind of say, well, let's plan a little bit out of session what next session is going to look like after a year's gone by.
So do you ever have incidents? I have a lot of incidents where, say, for instance, you have a group of players. And the players are like, oh, the cult meeting is going to happen tonight, and the big bad's going to be there, and we can stop him, and we know when it's going to happen, and we're going to show up, and we're going to absolutely whip his tail, and it's going to be amazing. Happen. Do you ever have times when your players are like, well, we'd really like to make this magic item, and you're like, but that'll take 6 months, and you've got to go. Are you still going to go tonight? And they're like, no, we just don't go. We're going to make the magic item instead.
All right.
Because I've had this. This is my life, Nate. This is, and you
the
have
fact that you still play D&D is a testament to your love of the game. Well, that's what I'm gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say, Kienata.
Avrahama said, Nate, so how went the anti-paladin Lord of the Dead Plant People Grove?
Well, I haven't got any pushback yet.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be wrapping up that campaign soon. That grove is a important part of, and we'll see how the rest of the party reacts to my mushroom people.
See, you just said that the grove is an important part of the campaign.
To
my
me.
players would be marching towards it with torches right now.
To me,
like that.
as a player, I don't think it's important to the overall story arc.
Difficult players makes you a better GM. I promise. It's just like
difficult players. Yes.
It's just like
no.
It's just like rugby. I played rugby for a while on a community team. I played with a bunch of members of the police force, and the guys in that community team were all way bigger than me. And I complained because when I got hit, it was like debilitating. Like one of those guys would hit me in practice, and I'd be like, I can't breathe. Like it was killing me. And they just said, you'll just get good quick. You'll stop letting people hit you at some point. So for GMing, I swear, if you have really difficult players, they're just going to turn you into an awesome games master.
Well, I will say that I'm not going to deny that experience route is open. I would also say that that's kind of like saying being around annoying people all the times makes you a patient person.
It does. It does.
It can also make you a very angry, aggravated person who,
this
who
relationship
hates people.
Proof of that. You see how angry Nate is?
I'm not angry. I'm frustrated for you, since you don't seem to get frustrated about that.
No.
So I'm frustrated for you. Yeah, I would. It's not like I would kick people out for being annoying in that way, because that's just the way they want to play the game. But,
yeah.
I don't know.
I ran a lot of children's tables.
Oh, well, that's completely different.
And that's when I learned that if you are not able to adapt quickly, you will sink.
Yeah, they just lose their interest pretty quick.
Yeah. Kids, you've got 10-minute bursts. If you ever GM for children, you have 10-minute bursts. During that 10 minutes, you have to do enough to keep your players interested, especially if they're like 10 to 14, 10 to 15 range. In that burst, give them enough to think about, or enough action to make it interesting, or a question that will really make them want to sink their teeth in and sort it out. And then after that 10-minute burst, you need to fill in another 10-minute burst. And that's how you manage to keep those kinds of players interested. So,
Avrahama, one of my problems as a GM is I keep wanting to make every little plot point be about my big bad. Yes, that's something that can kind of, you're kind of focused on that story element, and you just keep going and saying, all right, this happens, and then after that, this will happen, and this happens. It's like a series of breadcrumbs that all lead up to this pile that is the big bad. And there's two ways of looking at that. Sometimes your players need 5 hints over those 5 storylines to get to where you want them to go. And if that's the type of player you have, then that problem that you're saying isn't bad. But to spice it up a bit, having story elements and events and other things that are not connected together makes the world seem more realistic. Because, let's say you have money problems. You've had money problems for the past 10 years. It's your big bad, money problems. not everything that happens to you is because your lack of money or your I don't know if you had too much money, it's a problem. I don't know. But whatever the case, that particular problem isn't all the things that happen around you, isn't pointing at that. So that's kind of the same thing with stories and different ways of interacting with NPCs and different little stories and different little arcs within the overarching thing, is that you don't necessarily, those can all kind of happen. It makes it feel more organic. So
I have another good question for you.
Sure.
This is an excellent one, and I love fielding this question. This can be asked during every Nerdarchy After Dark because I adore this question. What do you do if the bad guy's argument ends up being so good he flips your players?
Yeah. When you've got that happening, well, hopefully your bad guy's argument, maybe he's not that bad. Maybe he's just misunderstood. I hope you haven't been burning down villages and killing everybody, because that's going to be a hard sell.
Yeah, I have typically the groups would gravitate towards power.
Yeah,
and if they feel like I'm not going to monkey paw them just into the dirt for accepting the deal the bad guy is offering, if they feel like they're going to get out clean and get a bunch of power, like we all get Vorpal swords and we just have to kill one village of people. Yeah, they're dead. We'll take the swords. We're in. They're dead. Like that really.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, see. So what is it? Moral quandaries.
Moral quandaries
don't really work on your groups. Sounds like.
Well,
and if you know your players are those kind of people, then basically trying to apply this guy's bad and wrong and evil, you should be killing him or stopping him, not joining him. If that question comes up where they've got to say, well, man, we should really kind of go with this person. Yeah, let's do it. Well, maybe it's not just, we're talking about like he gives a really good monologue that they don't attack him before he's finished.
Right.
And they're like, wow, you know what? There is something wrong with this kingdom. We should overthrow the king. He's a right bastard because of XYZ things that have happened. If that's the villain's style, and yeah, you might end up playing a game in which, you know, your characters become the rebels with this guy. And in that instance, that's not so much a moral quandary unless the guy's already done a whole bunch of terrible things. But in this case, it's war at this point against a despot. As far as the players' characters are now convinced of how terrible this person is. So at that point, I mean, then you can just make it where, oh, a lot of the stuff you've heard is propaganda, and he didn't really do all the terrible things. He did some bad things. Or you could alter it if you saw fit, or you could be like, yeah, he did all these terrible things. It's war, so deal with it. And you could either make the king more of a despot than you had originally planned, or you could say, well, you guys are just picking kind of the wrong side here, and this guy is going to be a tyrant when he overthrows and kills the king and his family and all of his servants and anyone he ever liked, because you didn't know that was his plan, because hey, he wouldn't tell you that because you came to murder him, so he had to spin the tail pretty quick to get you on his side, and he successfully did it. So I would just say, as long as it doesn't go like full evil campaign and you weren't planning on that happening.
I have a classic villain example that I have used where the players have sided with the villain. Basically, some form of technology has arrived from some distant kingdom. Maybe it's guns, maybe it's a steam engine, any number of things. But essentially, I have some form of technology show up, and there's a person who's completely against it, and he's killed tons of people involved with this technology, and he's like, we have to keep it out, and this is why it's evil. I've pushed players into joining and helping eradicate not just the person bringing the technology, but going back to the root of it and murdering everyone who has knowledge of the technology, because so technology is an easy thing. If you want to bring in something where you're like, I want to flip the players or see if I can flip these players, bring in technology, give some good speeches. They will go after it with absolute vengeance. Oh, you're typing something.
Sorry.
Moral quandaries with NPCs they really like. I love NPCs that the players have started to really care about. That's it's definitely something that's wonderful, because just staying in character with that NPC, you can push storyline in a lot of directions.
I would say another way to, well, are we talking about flipping them now?
No. Having NPCs. It comes from the comment, Hodgepodge Syntaxia said, the only moral quandaries that matter to players are with NPCs that they really like. And I wasn't necessarily agreeing with that, because there are lots of moral quandaries you can throw at players, but NPCs that the players are absolutely in love with, that's a very powerful point of play from the GM.
Yeah, and they could be betraying the players at some point. They could, and it doesn't need to be like, meh, ha, ha, I fooled you the whole time. It can simply be that NPC is making a choice of their own that is going to be contrary to the benefit of the player characters, or the benefit of the realm the player characters are interested in protecting. So maybe they joined the big bad because he gave a really good speech when the guy showed up.
Yeah.
And he's kind of got him on his team now. So those things are drawing those NPCs and using them, especially ones that they've got a liking to. Now, I have to say, there's a few NPCs that I have that I enjoy. That I would be sad to have them do that, but if the plot demands it, then I guess they'll just have to happen.
Yeah. Iron Dragon, thanks for hanging out, dude. Have a good night, man. There you go. Raven Thylacine comes up with a perfect example of what I was talking about with technology. All of the technology is powered off of enslaved elementals.
Ooh. That's a good technology that could be considered too evil to use.
All of the technology operates off of burning kind of wood that only comes from treants. Which are just benign, good creatures.
Yikes.
Right. If you want to flip your players towards something, but the important thing is that as you're telling this story about technology, is that you impress upon them that the people who've been exposed to this technology, the day-to-day people, are living better lives, are living longer lives, are happier, because they have the technology, because that ultimately is the impact of useful technology, is that it improves quality of life for people. And so make sure the players are fully exposed to quality of life, and don't make it extreme, like these people are all super wealthy and live in opulent lifestyles. Just make it so poor people who couldn't eat before now get to eat. Now it's a moral quandary. Now it's difficult for players. Right, better living through chemistry.
The original green chemistry, by the way, was more about growing food than actually being environmentally friendly. So that was the original, like, green chemical revolution, was green about growing rather than... So, yeah. And that could be considered some nasty stuff. Eventually, they had lakes that you could light on fire because they were so full of gunk.
Right, so, exactly.
But hey, lots of people did not starve.
And you could... I would say definitely the technology would be a big bad element. But for me, I just throw that in there as a thing that was taking place. If players wanted to deal with it, they could or couldn't. Give them a Berserk Eclipse situation.
Yeah, don't make it Wakanda, just make it nice. Yeah, you don't have to dial it up to 11. You can have it just be better than what they've got now, and it's still like, well, do we do something about this, or do we let it stand?
Right, especially when you go to counter the big bad guy and you're murdering treants. Like, I can hear them moaning and dying as I'm talking to the big bad guy. And the big bad guys, like all of the farmland here runs off of this technology. If you take the treant killing away, all of these people will starve to death. Which one? Which one's it going to be?
You'd be like, well, I couldn't speak treant anyway. Let's go. Let's fire up the furnaces, baby.
I'm all for humans, so that's where my vote would go.
I'm pretty biased for human survival.
I want all the, but that way it would be different in a fantasy world because treants are sentient, and ultimately my soft spot is for things that can think for themselves,
especially cool magical things like talking trees
with leaves. It's got leaves. I would really like it to live. But yeah.
All right, we're gonna do some final question.
Okay.
Because we are running towards the end of the evening.
And you are feeling it at this point?
Yeah, I've been feeling it the whole time, but
Nate and I had a discussion about whether we were going to do tonight's stream or not before it started, and Nate was like, "No, I'm fine.
I'm totally fine.
I'm good."
I'm do it.
And I was like, we don't have to do this." And he's like, "I'm good." So we're still here. We're still here.
I did cough when I said that, by the way. It's true.
Yeah. Okay, final question.
Stitch the Alchemist says, I find puppy murdering villains to be a great starting point. Yeah, well, you kind of know where the players are going to go on that one.
Exactly. This is a dependable response.
And if you want to have kind of more direction, for the most part, don't let the villains give good speeches, and make it pretty clear cut that they're problems that they got to get taken care of, probably by the sword.
You see the big bad out in the field with a club beating puppies. Yeah. What?
I import baby seals, so I don't have to go far to kill him.
Yeah.
Like, good God, man.
Yeah. Okay, that's dark. He's dead. Yeah. Okay. So last question we want to field here. Something good. Give us a good one. Oh, Pet Shop said, what did the treant say to the big bad burning them alive? Leave me alone.
Oh, excellent.
It hurts.
Yeah, Winnie the Fox, you're here just in time for us to wrap it up.
Yeah. Hodgepodge Syntaxia said, what's the meaning of life? 42. For a fact, it is 42.
Factually. Well, I don't know. I think we have to build a bigger, better computer for this.
Yeah, exactly. Love. That's the meaning of life.
Okay, so what are some good end goals for PCs? Well, that's going to depend on what the PCs want to see as their character. Like, I mean, maybe you only get like 6 months out of a game. Well, don't have their goals include like fighting Eldritch Kings or Tiamats or demigods, because they're probably not going to make it there in time. So, you want to kind of make it more, talk to them about making their character goals where they can see some kind of arc or change over time through the campaign that is palpable, is like able to be seen, but not necessarily too big to fit into the stories you've got going on, or have several and say, well, we might not get to them all. So I have some characters in my current game that they've wrapped up some of their elements that they wanted to see out of their character, but they're only like 5th level, so they've got a while to go.
I would like to answer a question from Johnny Pumpkinhead.
Sure.
Johnny Pumpkinhead, so what's your guys' input on the offspring of a tiefling orc courtship? A slightly uglier tiefling. Done.
That's tiefling, sir.
Oh, God, guys. Chimera, scimitar, herb. I go all day.
It's herb because there's an H in it.
It's herb because there's an H in it, you idiot. Yeah.
Yeah, so as far as input on tiefling and orc, I would say you could just...
Is it tiefling?
No, it could be, I would say you could pick tiefling or you could pick half orc. and then just kind of choose what they look like. Maybe that they're half orc with
Ooh,
horns.
would it have dark vision?
Possibly give them dark vision.
That's weird. So what if you had anything breed with a half dragon? Would it have dark vision?
No, you'd be a dragonborn and you'd lose your sight. You'd be a blind dragonborn. That's what would happen. Oh, thank you, Aaron Parks. That was I enjoyed Eddie Izzard quite a bit.
Yeah, very
Love
good.
his old stuff. I don't know if he's got some new stuff out. I can't speak about that.
Cartoons.
Does that make them an orcling?
Like that.
No. So I would say, well, okay. Nerdarchy's view, in mind as well, is when you're doing like race mix for different things, like tiefling and orc or whatever. It's like, well, there's already a half orc, so just kind of pick a race in the game that best kind of sums up what a grouping would be together of those two. And just a lot of it can be description, like mechanic wise. Well, is it savage or is it have more of the demonic ancestry to it? Do you know what I mean? So if it's got the more of the demonic ancestry, we'll just make it look like more of a tiefling and let it have the tiefling powers.
With big
and you
tusks.
could say, yeah, and with tusks, or a different colored, like maybe a more like an ochre color skin or whatever, like something that's going to distinguish it from the average tiefling. But I mean, you could be like more feral tiefling or whatever. Like you could kind of choose those different bits. Dragonborn and the halfling hybrid would be cute. I agree that they would be. They probably still would not have dark vision though.
Yeah.
Curses.
No dark vision for Dragonborn ever. I'm going to call Mike Marles. Hey, man, I need you to do me a favor. Trying to get under Nate's skin. Please don't give Dragonborn night vision ever.
Ever. Don't give it to them ever.
Thank you. Bye. And I love you.
Because of breath weapon songs. So, a Dragonborn winged elf hybrid would be a fun character. Yes, and I would say, if you're going to do that, I would say, rather than try and create some new thing, either it's a Dragonborn and they might have wings but they can't fly. Like maybe they're more like vestigial, I think that's called. Or
vestigial. That means they have wings but they can't do anything with their.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, they have wings but they can't fly. Or it's a winged. You pick the winged elf as the race and just make them scaled, and make them more lizard-like or other. But I'm going to have to say I would find it very difficult with reptilian creatures and mammals. I don't know if that would work out really well. But hey, it's a fantasy game. Maybe
Dragonborn,
maybe it's a match. I mean, they're magically created. So
technically, when the two species try and breed, what would happen is magic.
Yeah,
magic.
Let's just say it's magic.
Done.
Yeah, but I don't like mechanically to screw around with the races too much because you get this weird thing where someone's asking, well, are you screwing around with the races because you want some kind of weird mechanical advantage? Or did you want to just make a cool story thing? If you just wanted to make a cool story thing, just pick one of the races that its parent is and just go with it. And just flavor, description, aspects of it, personality, however you want, that's going to make you think, yeah, this is a hybrid person. This is a half tiefling, half orc.
When I have someone who's going for a specific mechanical advantage, I kind of try and lead them or talk them into telling me what they envision the character being like so I can understand what the mechanical advantage was for. And then sometimes we can even work together and create a story and come up with why that okay, just bump your strength up a point. It's not that important. Let's, you know what I mean? Like you just want two 18s. All right. Well, does the rest of the group, nobody cares. Just have two 18s. Like, what do you, yeah. So.
Right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up now. Thank you for joining us. We've definitely meandered quite a lot, but that is all what Nerdarchy After Dark is about. We start with something, and then we definitely don't end with it, probably.
Yeah.
And if you've got comments that you want to talk about, anything that we've discussed here, short story arc or grand designs for GM tips or tips of your own that you'd like to impart to people, feel free to leave those in the comments below. While you're at it, like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.